Digital technologies have long been sold in the social studies as a way to improve social studies teaching and learning. But it's important for us as educators to think about the context in which our students are working with technology and determining the extent to which we should engage students in this work and the ways in which we should do this effectively. Way back in the 60s with the new social studies projects, technology was seen as a way to improve social studies teaching and learning. It was used for basic conceptual understanding, to engage students in inquiry, to help inculcate students to the values associated with the disciplines that made up the social studies, and then ultimately integrated into teacher education. Made sense if teachers were going to be using technology for teaching, that part of their teacher training should also integrate technology. Now, obviously, technology at this time was not necessarily computer-based technology we think of today. However, it was used in a variety of ways to bring in multimedia, to make learning much more authentic for students, and again, to engage them in thinking in the habits of mind or the thinking activities associated with the disciplines. So, for example, this quote from Bruner's helpful to think about sort of the sense of the age in which multimedia was integrated into the classroom to present material to the students of a kind that would not be available to them in their ordinary school experience. And I think it's fair to say that today, similarly, social studies teachers do the same. They integrate technology into the classroom to make the learning more authentic and to bring in real world resources. In the late 90s, Peter Martorella, who is a faculty member here at NC State, developed a metaphor of technology in the social studies as the sleeping giant. So, to contextualize his work, he was writing during the internet revolution when we're seeing technology, and in this case, internet based or web based technology, really changing a variety of fields. But he felt that it was slow to impact the social studies. And in response to this, he suggests that we could actually integrate social technology into the social studies as really a part of the content or the curriculum. And so he felt that students could study computers, study technology, and the way in which it's shaping society and shaping history. And so he suggested actually 5 different ways that students could study computers: as the alter ego, as a citizenship educator, as a new workplace, as a school, and then ultimately as a data gatherer. He wanted people to not think so much of technology as a tool, but actually to be something that should be grappled with in terms of its implications. His famous metaphor, though, sleeping giant, about technology has been quoted numerous times in our field because it seems to continue to capture the notion that social studies teachers and the field in general has been slow to adopt technology. In 2008, we began to see more references to Web 2.0 technology. So, for example, this was technology that now you could shape. Think about the things that came in the mid 2000s that were now available, for instance, blogging tools, uh, Facebook, other social media, Twitter, etc. All really began to become sort of exciting to educators as having potential for students to actually be content creators. So whereas before you might passively sort of be receptors where you're looking at new technologies or sort of receiving it, now you could actually be developing it and transmitting it. And so in Chris Deedy's work, he made this big distinction between what he called a classical approach to education that was dominated by curriculum standards, high stakes testing, and these sort of quote unquote assimilative pedagogy. So here you saw the technology being used to, for instance, as a lecture or PowerPoint slides, not really challenging the status quo in the field of education. But what Chris Deedy and many other educators of his time found to be extremely exciting was what he called a Web 2.0 approach. Here, curriculum includes variation from one community to another, and importantly, active learning pedagogies that emphasize constructivist and situated teaching approaches. And what's so interesting to me here when I read Dee Dee's work from 2008, how it was similar to what we saw in the 60s with the new social studies movement. Similarly, educators across these decades felt like technology might be the conduit for really engaging students actively in constructivist and situated teaching approaches. And so there we are today, sort of called in 2020 to continue this struggle towards more active learning pedagogies that emphasize constructivist teaching that we know cognitively improves student learning. And we have this tremendous amount of tools and resources. The question is, why aren't more social studies teachers using them? And then at the same time, I think we also have to be aware and responsive to the contemporary context. With that in mind, there's been much theorizing about the type of knowledge base that teachers, in particular social studies, teachers need to know in order to effectively integrate technology. And so, sort of a famous model here is TPAC, Technological Pedagogical Content Knowledge. And what you see here is that the sort of traditional pedagogical content knowledge made up of pedagogical knowledge, in other words, the knowledge of how to teach, and content knowledge, so all of your background knowledge that you gained in your history or other social science courses, come together, you sort of translate your content knowledge through your pedagogical knowledge to come up with something that's meaningful for students in the classroom. Here, the teacher is really the translator. And then what's happened here in TPAC is you add a third layer of technological knowledge. So here, the ultimate sort of middle piece of TPAC is when a teacher is effectively able to integrate both technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge into a meaningful learning experience for students. And so this model of TPAC has dominated teacher ed for probably a decade in terms of really trying to engage pre-service or experienced teachers in thinking about the tools or technological tools available that can improve student learning. Part of this, of course, is being aware of the students we're working with. There's been a lot of statistics about how much teens use technology. Probably the most famous of these have been published by the Pew Internet study. So, for example, according to recent research, about 95% of teens have access to a smartphone. So, this is incredible computing power, kind of just little thought of at the time of the new social studies. And 45% say they're almost online constantly. And what you can see here from this statistic is that they're actually using quite a bit of those Web 2.0 technologies that Dee Dee pointed to. So YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, etc., all places where teens can not only become consumers of technology, but actually produce technology as well. And teens report, that there's positive and negative sides to their technology use. So, for example, according to the survey respondents, some said that, technology had a positive effect in terms of connecting with their friends and family, having access to information. But then they also listed negative effects, including perhaps cyberbullying, increased anxiety from being so aware of what other people are doing. As a result, I think there's almost a cottage industry that's grown up around exploring the implications of internet technology on students and on American public in general. So, three of these, for example, here, Glow Kids, The Dumbest Generation, and Screen Schooled, are actually part of your choices for the book review for this course. And I think it's really important for us to turn a critical eye to this work to see what kind of, truth we can gain from it as educators, but then also to problematize areas where we think they may have been sort of over exaggerating, and whether or not there's really clear answers for us as educators within these texts for working with our teens. So, for example, is the answer to just simply remove technology from schools? Or should we be responsible for helping students navigate their technological landscape? A kind of a recent documentary film, for instance, Screenagers, really takes on those questions about the role that parents and teachers should have in terms of this new context of teens. So, although adolescents might be online almost constantly, they certainly aren't able to use it for learning necessarily. They need help in terms of using technology to improve their understanding. And they also need help, perhaps, navigating technology as teens because of their adolescent brain. One of my favorite books is Popular by Mitch Prinstein, and here he really talks about, um, kind of really the neural pathways that are responsible for uh, screen addiction in many ways. And so he talks about how adolescents in particular are very susceptible to the social pressure of being online and being liked online. And marketers know this, right? So we've heard the fear of missing out is a very real thing that's used in advertisement quite a bit, but also has shown up in psychology as something that people are afraid of missing out, that their friends are all together or that they might not be on trend. At the same time, we've seen a little bit of a backlash, for instance, the joy of missing out. Some schools are beginning to do sort of like screen-free weeks, like this one here from screenfree.org. Parents are helping their students sign pledges that they're going to wait until 8th grade to receive a smartphone. So this is all a part of something called a techlash, perhaps, um, that doesn't refer necessarily to just one single issue, but perhaps several issues that gave the people pause or public pause about the role of technology in the tech sector in our lives. So again, it's not just teens that I think we're concerned with, but it's also the way in which adults are able to navigate technology. As Mitchell Kapoor said, getting information on the internet is like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. So again, there's been quite a bit of concern about for adults and for teens, our ability, for instance, to multitask and to find reliable information online. If you take just a quick second to glance over these top 10 tech issues, I'm also reminded of Martarella's work and think that each of these could really become a content piece for a social studies classroom. All of these issues have social studies roots and can be studied using the disciplines that make up the social studies, including history and the social sciences. One that rises to the top is fake news, which became the word of the year in 2017 for its role in the 2016 presidential election. Still trying to untangle the impact of fake news on the electorate in the 2016 election. So, for example, uh, several studies were done about fake election stories that were spread during the presidential election, and just how many Americans um, read and perhaps passed on these stories. So, and it has continued since the election. So, if you look at this list from NewsWhip, you'll the most commented Facebook page or headlines. Why don't you just take a minute to see what you notice? And what you might see pretty quickly is that there's some questionable publishers. Many of the headlines are designed to spark a strong reaction. They're often polarizing and some are scary. And then many of them are outright false. So now as teachers, we need to help our students navigate very different types of misinformation, everything from outright hoaxes or fabricated content to parodies, or then things that are just misleading or put things in a false context. So on this continuation of fake news between misrepresentations and hoaxes, these teachers are being called on to teach media literacy as part of our social studies curriculum. It's seen as an essential skill for active citizenship. So here we're in this place where on one hand, we're very eager to integrate technology into the classroom. We think it will improve student learning. We think it'll lead to more authentic or inquiry-based approaches to learning. But yet at the same time, as parents and adults and caregivers, as teachers, we're increasingly concerned about the role of technology and the way in which it may be hurting rather than helping our students.